Eleanor's last $3 bought her a husband no other woman would touch, a notorious bounty hunter whose hands had ended 15 lives. With winter approaching and her children facing starvation, the desperate widow had decided that a dangerous man was better than no man at all. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The town of Willow Creek buzzed with anticipation on auction day, not for cattle or land, but for men. Eleanor Mills clutched the 3 worn dollar bills in her trembling hand, her knuckles white from the pressure. 6 months a widow, with a failing farm and hungry mouths to feed, she had exhausted every option available to a respectable woman. The bride auction was her last desperate chance. "You don't have to do this, Ellie," whispered Martha, her closest friend since childhood, who stood beside her in the crowded meeting hall. "My Thomas and I can help you through winter." Eleanor shook her head, loose strands of chestnut hair escaping her hastily arranged bun. "Your family barely has enough as it is. I won't be a burden." Her voice was soft but resolute, carrying the determination that had sustained her through the months since Samuel's passing. The hall, normally reserved for town gatherings and Sunday services, had been transformed for this unusual purpose. Wooden benches arranged in rows faced a small platform where each bachelor would stand. Men from surrounding areas had answered the town council's advertisement: drifters, laborers, failed prospectors, and even a few respectable tradesmen down on their luck, all willing to marry a stranger in exchange for a home and a fresh start. Women like Eleanor, widowed by illness or accident, left with property but no means to work it, came clutching whatever savings they could muster. Some carried impressive purses of $20 or more. Eleanor's $3 represented everything she had after selling her wedding ring. Mayor Thornton, a portly man with mutton chop whiskers, pounded his gavel for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen of Willow Creek, we gather today for a most practical affair. Times are hard, and necessity breeds innovation." His voice boomed across the hall with practiced authority. "The rules are simple. Each man will present himself, state his skills and qualities. Ladies will bid. Highest offer secures the match. Marriage to be performed by Reverend Collins immediately following." Eleanor scanned the row of men seated at the side of the platform. Most were weathered, hard-looking individuals, the kind of men who had followed misfortune across the frontier. Her heart sank. What kind of husband could $3 buy? And what kind of man would accept such a paltry sum? "First up, Howard Jenkins," announced the mayor. "Carpenter by trade, 36 years of age." A stocky man with a neatly trimmed beard stepped onto the platform. "I'm handy with tools, ma'am, don't drink excessively, and know how to fix near anything that's broken." His eyes roamed the crowd of women with a mixture of hope and embarrassment. "Opening bid at $5, called the mayor. Hands shot up around the room. $5, $8, $10. The bidding quickly escalated, and Howard Jenkins was soon matched with a stout widow who had offered $15 and mentioned her late husband's carpentry shop needing a new proprietor. One by one, men were presented and claimed. A blacksmith went for $22 to a widow with 3 young sons. A former shopkeeper with a bad leg but gentle manners was matched for $12. With each successful pairing, Eleanor's anxiety grew. The quality of men diminished as the auction progressed, leaving those with obvious flaws or questionable backgrounds. $3 won't get you much, Ellie," Martha murmured, concern etched across her face. "Perhaps we should leave." "I can't," Eleanor replied. "Winter's coming. The children and I won't survive alone." The loss of Samuel had been sudden. A fall from the barn roof during repairs, his neck broken instantly. Eleanor had managed through spring and summer, but with autumn's chill already in the air, the harsh reality of her situation could no longer be ignored. Her boy James was only 7. her daughter Sarah just 5, too young to provide meaningful help with the heavy work of farming. Next, called the mayor, consulting his list, Jackson Hayes, drifter, farmhand, age unknown. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd as the next man stepped forward. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Unlike the others who had worn their Sunday best, this man was dressed simply in worn jeans and a black vest that hung open, revealing a physique that spoke of years of hard physical labor. Tall and powerfully built, with dark hair that curled slightly at his neck, he carried himself with a quiet confidence that commanded attention. His face remained impassive as the mayor continued. Hayes claims experience with cattle, crops, and construction. No known family. No references provided. Eleanor studied him carefully. There was something dangerous about him. Not merely his impressive build or the small scar that cut across his right eyebrow, but something in his eyes. They were startlingly blue against his sun-darkened skin, and they surveyed the room with cool detachment, as if he were assessing livestock rather than potential wives. "Who would bid on a man with no history?" whispered a woman behind Eleanor. "He could be running from the law." "Or worse," replied another. "Look at those hands. They've done violence, mark my words." The mayor cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Shall we start the bidding at $5? Silence fell across the room. The women exchanged glances, but no hands were raised. "Very well," said the mayor after an awkward pause. $3 then?" Still no response. Eleanor felt a strange flutter in her chest. Here was a man clearly capable of the backbreaking work her farm required, yet no one would bid. Was their instinctive wariness justified, or was it an opportunity? "If there are no bids," the mayor continued, "we'll move to the next. $3. Eleanor's voice surprised even herself, cutting through the silence with quiet determination. Every head in the room turned toward her. Martha grabbed her arm. "Ellie, no, we know nothing about him." But Eleanor's eyes remained fixed on the man on the platform, who now studied her with newfound interest. Something passed between them in that moment, not warmth or connection, but a mutual recognition of desperation and pragmatism. $3 from Mrs. Eleanor Mills, announced the mayor, relief evident in his voice at moving the proceedings along. "Any higher bids?" The silence that followed confirmed what Eleanor already knew. No one else would risk it. The man, Jackson, gave a slight nod, accepting her meager offer without expression. "Sold to Mrs. Mills for $3, declared the mayor, bringing down his gavel with finality. Eleanor approached the platform on legs that threatened to give way beneath her. Up close, Jackson Hayes was even more imposing. She had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze as she held out her 3 crumpled dollar bills. $3 is all I have for a husband," she whispered, too quiet for others to hear, a confession and an apology in one. He took the money, his rough fingers briefly touching her trembling ones. $3 for a farm and a family, he replied, his voice a low rumble. "Seems fair enough." As they moved toward the Reverend's table to complete the paperwork that would bind them legally together, Eleanor felt the curious and pitying stares of the townspeople. She had purchased herself not just a farmhand, but a mystery, a man whose past and character were unknown quantities. What kind of bargain had she made? Only time would tell if her desperate gamble would save her family or destroy what remained of it. The ceremony was brief and perfunctory, nothing like the church wedding Eleanor had shared with Samuel 8 years prior. Reverend Collins spoke the words with mechanical efficiency, his eyes never quite meeting Eleanor's, as she stood beside this stranger who would now be her husband. There were no rings exchanged. She had sold hers, and Jackson Hayes possessed none. Only a signed certificate and the Reverend's hasty blessing marked the transformation of their status. "You may kiss your bride," the Reverend said at last, more from habit than expectation. Jackson glanced down at Eleanor, his expression unreadable. After a moment's hesitation, he simply nodded and said, "That won't be necessary." Relief and disappointment mingled in Eleanor's chest as she gathered her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She hadn't expected tenderness, but the stark business-like nature of their union struck her with unexpected force. Martha approached as they moved away from the Reverend's table, her expression a mixture of concern and resignation. "Ellie, we've prepared a basket for you, just some preserves and bread to start your new household." She handed over the carefully wrapped package, then leaned in to whisper, "Thomas says if there's any trouble, any at all, our door is always open." "Thank you," Eleanor replied, squeezing her friend's hand. "We'll be fine." The words sounded hollow even to her own ears. The ride back to her farm took place in silence. Jackson sat beside her on the wagon bench, reins held loosely in his capable hands. Eleanor had brought the wagon alone, not expecting to return with a husband. Now, with each clip of the horse's hooves, the reality of what she had done pressed more heavily upon her. "The farm is about 3 miles outside town," she said finally, unable to bear the silence any longer. "It's not large, 40 acres, mostly cleared. The house is small but sound." Jackson nodded, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Livestock?" "2 milk cows, some chickens. We had more before." She swallowed. "Before my husband died. Had to sell the plow horse and most of the cattle to get by these past months." "Tools?" His questions were direct, practical. "Basic farming implements. Some need repair. Samuel was still building our reserves when he—" She let the sentence trail off, unwilling to speak again of death to this man who was still a stranger. "Children?" This question came after a longer pause, as if he had just remembered this possibility. "2. James is 7, Sarah 5. Eleanor turned slightly to study his profile. "Does that bother you? Taking on another man's children?" The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but something that softened his severe expression momentarily. Children are children. Not their fault who their father was. Something about the way he said it suggested personal experience, but Eleanor knew better than to pry. Whatever demons Jackson Hayes carried, they would reveal themselves in time. For now, she needed his strength and his labor, not his confidences. As they crested the final hill, Eleanor's farm came into view. The small whitewashed house with its sagging porch stood like a lonely sentinel amid fields that showed signs of neglect. The barn leaned slightly to one side, its red paint faded and peeling. Late autumn had stripped the surrounding trees bare, giving the homestead a stark, vulnerable appearance against the gray sky. "It's not much," she said apologetically, seeing it now through a stranger's eyes. "It's shelter," he replied, "and it's yours." A small figure darted from the house as they approached, James, his mop of brown hair flying as he ran toward the wagon. Behind him came Mrs. Winters, the neighbor's wife, who had agreed to watch the children during Eleanor's trip to town. Sarah peeked shyly from behind the older woman's skirts. "Mama, you're back!" James called, then froze as he noticed the man beside his mother. His young face, so open with joy seconds before, closed immediately into wariness. Eleanor climbed down from the wagon, gathering her son into her arms. "James, this is Mr. Hayes. He's going to be staying with us, helping with the farm." She couldn't bring herself to use the word husband just yet, not to her son who still spoke of his father with such adoration. Jackson descended from the wagon with surprising grace for such a large man. He nodded to the boy, James, then to the little girl who was now hiding completely behind Mrs. Winters. "Miss Sarah, I presume." Mrs. Winters looked from Jackson to Eleanor, understanding dawning in her weathered face. "You found someone at the auction then," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "Yes. This is Jackson Hayes. My Husband. The word felt strange on Eleanor's tongue. I see. Mrs. Winter's expression spoke volumes about what she thought of this development. Well, the children have been fed. I left stew warming for you. She gathered her coat and bonnet. I'll be on my way then. Thomas will be wondering where I've got to. Once the neighbor had departed, an awkward silence fell over the small family group. Sarah had moved to hide behind Eleanor now, while James stood slightly apart, his young face set in an expression of suspicion, far too mature for his years. Are you really our new pa? He asked directly, chin tilted up defiantly. Jackson crouched down to the boy's level, meeting his gaze. No, your pa was your pa, and from what your ma tells me, he was a good one. I'm here to help your ma with the work that needs doing. That clear enough? James considered this, then nodded slowly. You're awful big. The corner of Jackson's mouth twitched again. Makes me useful for reaching high things. This pragmatic response seemed to satisfy the boy for the moment. Sarah, however, remained firmly attached to her mother's skirts, wide eyes fixed on the stranger. Let's get inside, Eleanor suggested, feeling the chill of approaching evening. I'll show you the house. The interior of the small farmhouse was neat, but sparse, evidence of Eleanor's careful housekeeping and the gradual selling off of non-essential items. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a sturdy table, a few chairs, and a small settee arranged near the stone fireplace. A curtained doorway led to the single bedroom, which Eleanor had shared with her children since Samuel's death. Jackson took in the space with a single sweeping glance, noting the patched curtains and the carefully mended cushions. Where will I sleep? He asked, practical as ever. Eleanor flushed slightly. There's only the one bedroom. I thought the barn has a small attached room. Samuel used it as a workshop. There's space for a cot. If he was offended by this arrangement, Jackson gave no sign. That'll do fine. I've slept in worse. We can discuss more permanent arrangements later, she added hastily. Once we've, adjusted. He nodded, accepting this without comment. I'll bring in the wagon and see to the horses, then I'd like to take a look around before dark, get a sense of what needs doing first. As he turned to leave, Sarah finally spoke, her small voice barely audible. Are you going to stay forever? Jackson paused at the door, regarding the little girl with those piercing blue eyes. For the first time, Eleanor saw something like gentleness in his expression. I made a deal with your ma, he said simply. I don't break deals. With that, he stepped outside, leaving Eleanor to wonder exactly what kind of man she had brought into their lives. Not a father for her children, he'd made that clear. Not a replacement for Samuel, not a husband in any traditional sense. A worker, a protector perhaps, a necessity for survival. As she moved to stir the stew Mrs. Winters had left, Eleanor caught sight of her reflection in the small mirror by the door. The face that looked back at her seemed different somehow, older, more determined, but also uncertain. She had made her choice, spent her $3. Now she would have to live with the consequences, whatever they might be. Outside, she could hear Jackson speaking quietly to the horses as he unhitched them from the wagon. His deep voice, though indistinct, carried a surprising gentleness when addressing the animals. Perhaps that was a good sign, or perhaps it meant nothing at all. Only time would tell. Dawn broke cold and gray the next morning, frost glittering on the withered grass as Eleanor stirred the coals in the kitchen stove. She had risen earlier than usual, anxiety preventing sleep beyond the first hint of light. What would this first full day as a married woman, a stranger's wife, bring? She nearly jumped when a sharp knock came at the door. Jackson stood outside, already dressed and alert despite the early hour. His breath formed clouds in the crisp morning air. "Check the property at first light," he said without preamble. "Fences on the north side won't last the winter. Barn roof needs patching before snow. Root cellar's half empty." He delivered this assessment in the same even tone he might use to comment on the weather. Eleanor wrapped her shawl tighter against the chill. "I know it's not in good condition. After Samuel died, I tried to maintain what I could, but wasn't criticizing," he interrupted. "Just taking stock. Need to know what we're facing." "We," she repeated softly, the word strange on her tongue. It had been months since she'd been part of any we beyond herself and her children. Jackson shifted his weight, seemingly uncomfortable with her scrutiny. "Got a few dollars saved, not much, but enough for supplies. Make a list of what's most urgent." Eleanor blinked in surprise. "You have money? But I thought—" "Didn't say I was destitute," he replied. "Just willing to marry for a farm." This practical statement reminded Eleanor forcefully of what their arrangement truly was. Not a marriage of affection or even compatibility, but a business transaction. $3 for a strong back and capable hands. $3 for survival. "Come in for breakfast," she said finally. "The children will be up soon." Over a simple meal of cornmeal mush, Eleanor observed the silent man across from her. He ate efficiently, without hurry, but without savoring either. When James appeared, tousle-haired and wary, Jackson acknowledged him with a nod but didn't force conversation. Sarah, clinging to Eleanor's side, received the same quiet respect for her obvious apprehension. "Thought I'd repair that loose step on the porch first," Jackson said as he finished eating. "Then see about reinforcing the north fence. Boy can help if he's willing." James looked up, surprised at being addressed, even indirectly. "I can help," he stated, a challenge in his voice. Jackson nodded. "Good. Need someone to hold the nails." He stood and carried his bowl to the wash basin. "Thank you for the meal." The day passed in a blur of activity. From her kitchen window, Eleanor watched Jackson work with steady, methodical efficiency. The loose porch step was secured before mid-morning. By noon, he had assessed the barn roof and gathered materials for repair. James followed him like a shadow, initially suspicious but gradually drawn in by the man's quiet competence. "He knows lots about fixing things, Mama," James reported during lunch, excitement overcoming his initial wariness. "Says he's worked on farms all over the territory." "Does he now?" Eleanor glanced at Jackson, who seemed focused entirely on his meal. "Where did you learn your skills, Mr. Hayes?" A slight tension crossed his shoulders at the direct question. "Here and there. Worked where work was available." "And where was that exactly?" she pressed, suddenly needing to know something, anything concrete about this man who now shared their lives. Jackson set down his fork and met her gaze directly. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, using her married name deliberately, "I'm here to work your farm and help you through winter. My past is my own business. That was our arrangement." The use of her new name, Mrs. Hayes, sent an unexpected shiver down Eleanor's spine. There was no threat in his words, just a clear boundary being established. She nodded stiffly and returned to her stew. That evening, after the children were asleep, Eleanor gathered her courage and walked to the barn. The small attached workshop was illuminated by the soft glow of a lantern. She knocked tentatively on the half-open door. Jackson sat on the edge of his makeshift bed, cleaning mud from his boots. He looked up, surprise flickering briefly across his features. "I brought you an extra blanket," she said, holding out the carefully folded wool. "The nights are getting colder." He accepted it with a nod. "Thank you." Eleanor hesitated, then stepped fully into the small space. Tools hung neatly on the walls, Samuel's tools, unused since his death. The room was spare but tidy. Jackson had clearly organized it to suit his needs with minimal disruption. "I want to apologize for my questions earlier," she said finally. "You're right. Our arrangement didn't include your past, only your labor." Jackson set aside his boot. "No offense taken. It's just—" She struggled to articulate her unease. "You're a stranger living on my property around my children. Surely you understand my concern." He studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes unreadable in the lantern light. "I understand concern for your children," he said finally. "So I'll tell you this much. I've never harmed a child or a woman, never been in prison, never killed a man who wasn't trying to kill me first." The qualification in that last statement hung heavy in the air between them. Eleanor swallowed hard, realizing this partial confession confirmed at least some of her unspoken fears about his past. "Is someone looking for you?" she asked quietly. "Not anymore." His tone made it clear that was all he would say on the matter. Eleanor nodded slowly. "Very well. Good night, Mr. Hayes." "Jackson," he corrected. "If we're to maintain this pretense of marriage, you should use my given name, at least when others are present." "Jackson," she repeated softly. "Then you should call me Eleanor." "Eleanor," he acknowledged, the word sounding strangely intimate in his deep voice. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "The children and I attend church on Sundays. It would be appropriate if you would join us." Something like amusement flickered in his eyes. "Will it improve my standing with the townsfolk? Make them less suspicious of the stranger you bought for $3? Eleanor flushed at his bluntness. "Perhaps. This arrangement is unusual enough without adding further gossip." "Then I'll attend," he agreed, "though it's been some time since I've set foot in a church." "God welcomes all who seek him," she replied automatically. This time, Jackson did smile, a brief, sardonic twist of his lips. "Does he now? Even those with blood on their hands?" Eleanor felt a chill at his words, but lifted her chin. "Especially those if they come with true repentance." "Repentance," he repeated, as if testing an unfamiliar word. "That would require regret, wouldn't it?" Without waiting for her response, he returned his attention to his boots, a clear dismissal. Eleanor retreated, her mind whirling with new questions about the man she had married. The week passed in similar fashion. Jackson working from dawn until dusk, steadily addressing the most critical repairs around the farm. The north fence was reinforced, the barn roof patched, the chicken coop secured against predators. Eleanor found herself watching him, noting the careful precision of his movements, the quiet way he explained tasks to James, his respectful distance from Sarah until the little girl cautiously began to approach him herself. He took his meals with them but spoke little. Each night he returned to the workshop in the barn without complaint about the accommodation. Their interactions remained formal, pragmatic, focused on the immediate needs of the farm and family. By Sunday morning, when they prepared for church, Eleanor realized the balance of power in their strange arrangement had shifted subtly. Jackson had made himself necessary in just a few days, his competence highlighting how desperate their situation had truly been. Her initial sense of having purchased his service was giving way to the uncomfortable awareness that, in many ways, he had rescued them. As they climbed into the wagon for the journey to town, Jackson in clean clothes with his dark hair neatly combed, Eleanor caught herself wondering what the townspeople would make of him now. Would they see the dangerous drifter from the auction, or would they recognize the capable, measured man she was slowly discovering? More troubling still was the question she couldn't quite suppress. What other facets of Jackson Hayes remained hidden beneath his carefully controlled exterior? And when those aspects inevitably revealed themselves, would she regret her desperate bargain? The small white church at the edge of Willow Creek seemed to gleam in the crisp autumn sunlight. Eleanor felt every eye upon them as Jackson helped her down from the wagon, his movements courteous but distant. James jumped down on his own, eager to join the other boys who were playing marbles in the churchyard. Sarah clung to Eleanor's hand, her eyes wide as she stared up at Jackson in his clean shirt and carefully combed hair. "You look different," the little girl observed suddenly. Jackson glanced down at her. "Clean clothes, that's all." Sarah considered this for a moment. "You look nice," she decided, then immediately hid her face in her mother's skirts. A hint of surprise crossed Jackson's features before his expression settled back into its usual impassivity. He offered his arm to Eleanor with formal correctness, clearly aware of the watching townsfolk. Eleanor hesitated only briefly before placing her hand on his forearm. The solid muscle beneath the fabric of his sleeve reminded her forcefully of the strength she had purchased with her $3, strength that had already begun transforming her neglected farm. "Mrs. Hayes, how lovely to see you," called Martha, hurrying over with forced cheerfulness. Her eyes darted to Jackson, curious assessment poorly disguised as welcome. "And Mr. Hayes, of course, we're so pleased you could join us for worship." Other church members approached more cautiously, women gathering around Eleanor with transparent curiosity, while their husbands nodded stiffly to Jackson from a safe distance. The whispers were barely contained. Eleanor caught fragments about the bride auction and mysterious stranger from all sides. Reverend Collins greeted them at the church door, his smile not quite reaching his eyes as he shook Jackson's hand. "We welcome all souls seeking salvation, Mr. Hayes." "Appreciate that, Reverend," Jackson replied evenly, "though I'm mainly here to accompany my wife." The possessive term, "my wife," sent an unexpected warmth through Eleanor's chest, even as she recognized it as part of their public performance. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine this was real, that she was truly bringing her husband to meet her community, not maintaining a charade of respectability. Inside, they sat near the back, Eleanor painfully aware of the glances cast their way throughout the service. Jackson sat stiffly beside her, his large frame seeming out of place on the narrow pew. He followed the hymns without singing, listened to the sermon with unreadable expression, and stood or sat at appropriate moments by following Eleanor's lead. The sermon, ironically, centered on Ruth's loyalty and sacrifice. "Whither thou goest, I will go." Eleanor couldn't help wondering if Reverend Collins had chosen the text deliberately, perhaps as commentary on their unusual union. As the service concluded, Eleanor noticed Jackson studying the congregation with subtle attentiveness. His gaze lingered briefly on certain men, assessing them with a practiced eye before moving on. When Mayor Thornton approached after the benediction, Jackson straightened almost imperceptibly. "Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Hayes," the mayor greeted them, his wife hovering at his elbow. "I trust your arrangements are proving satisfactory." The delicate pause spoke volumes about what the town thought of their marriage. Eleanor felt a flash of resentment at the barely concealed judgment. "Mr. Hayes has been invaluable," she replied with deliberate warmth. "The farm is already showing improvement under his care." Jackson placed his hand lightly at the small of her back, the first time he had touched her beyond formal assistance. The gesture was clearly for show, establishing their connection for the watching townsfolk, but Eleanor couldn't prevent her slight intake of breath at the unexpected contact. "Glad to hear it," the mayor replied, his eyes darting between them with poorly disguised curiosity. "We were concerned, of course, given the unorthodox nature of the match." "Nothing unorthodox about a man working his wife's land," Jackson replied, his tone mild, but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "Or are you suggesting there's something improper about our marriage, Mayor?" The challenge hung in the air. Mayor Thornton's face flushed slightly. "Not at all, not at all. Simply expressing neighborly concern." The conversation was mercifully interrupted by James, who came running up with excitement. "Ma, Tommy says there's a harvest festival next week with apple bobbing and contests." Eleanor smiled at her son's enthusiasm. "Yes, it's an annual tradition. You'll come too, won't you, Mr. Hayes?" James asked, surprising Eleanor with his direct address to Jackson. Before Jackson could respond, a harsh voice cut through the pleasant churchyard chatter. "Well, if it isn't Jack Hayes." Eleanor turned to see a tall, lanky man with a sheriff's badge approaching from the direction of the town. His expression was a mixture of disbelief and grim satisfaction. Jackson's posture changed instantly, not quite threatening, but alert in a way that sent a chill down Eleanor's spine. "Sheriff," he acknowledged evenly. "Never expected to see you in a church," the sheriff continued, stopping a careful distance away. "Especially not playing husband to a respectable widow." Eleanor felt the curious stares intensify around them. "You know my husband, Sheriff Turner?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Know him?" The sheriff's laugh held no humor. "You could say that. Jack Hayes was the most feared bounty hunter in the territory a few years back. Brought in wanted men that nobody else could track or would dare to approach." His eyes narrowed. Some said he was more ruthless than the outlaws he hunted. The revelation hit Eleanor like a physical blow. A bounty hunter. A man who tracked and captured or killed outlaws for money. Suddenly, Jackson's capabilities, his watchfulness, his cryptic comment about never killing a man who wasn't trying to kill him first, it all made terrible sense. Jackson's face betrayed nothing, but his hand dropped away from Eleanor's back. "That was a long time ago." "Not so long," the sheriff countered. "You disappeared after that business with the Ryder gang. Some thought you were dead." "What business?" Eleanor found herself asking, though she feared the answer. Sheriff Turner's eyes never left Jackson. 4 of the most dangerous men in the territory. Hayes tracked them to their hideout in the Black Rim Mountains. None came back alive, including the 2 with bounties specifically for live capture. The implication was clear. Jackson had killed men who were supposed to be brought in alive. "They chose their fate," Jackson said quietly. "As I recall, you were happy enough to pay the bounties regardless." The sheriff's mouth tightened. "The territory needed cleaning up. Doesn't mean folks were comfortable with your methods." He tipped his hat to Eleanor. "Ma'am, I hope you know what kind of man you've brought into your home." With that parting shot, he moved away, leaving a wake of whispers and stares behind him. The wagon ride home was wrapped in heavy silence. Even the children seemed to sense the tension, neither asking the questions that surely bubbled in their young minds. Only when they approached the farm did Eleanor finally speak. "Were you ever going to tell me?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the creak of the wagon wheels. Jackson kept his eyes on the road. "You said it yourself. Our arrangement didn't include my past." "A bounty hunter," she whispered. "Those men you killed were killers themselves," he finished flatly. "Men who'd murdered families, robbed stagecoaches, raped women. The territory put prices on their heads for good reason." Eleanor tried to reconcile this information with the man who had carefully repaired her porch steps, who had explained to James how to hold a hammer properly, who had waited patiently until Sarah approached him of her own accord. "Why did you stop?" she asked finally. "Why come to a bride auction instead?" His hands tightened on the reins. "The Ryder gang was my last hunt. After that, I'd had enough, wanted something different." "What happened with them? With the Ryder gang?" Jackson was silent for so long that Eleanor thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, as if the words came from somewhere deep inside him. "They'd taken hostages. A family, father, mother, 2 young girls. When I tracked them to their hideout, I found the parents already dead. The girls," he paused. "The older one was still alive. Barely. The younger one was hiding in a root cellar." Eleanor closed her eyes, the horror of his words painting vivid pictures in her mind. "I didn't give them the chance to surrender," Jackson continued flatly, "and I didn't lose any sleep over it afterward." The farm came into view, its familiar outline somehow changed by what Eleanor now knew. As Jackson brought the wagon to a halt, she found herself studying his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the scar across his eyebrow, the eyes that had seen more violence than she could imagine. "Does it change our arrangement?" he asked suddenly, turning to meet her gaze directly. "Knowing what I was?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. This man was dangerous, far more dangerous than she had realized. Yet he had dealt fairly with her, worked tirelessly on her farm, and shown nothing but patient respect to her children. "No," she said finally. "Our arrangement stands. But no more secrets, Jackson. Not about anything that might affect my family." He nodded once, acceptance of her terms. As he helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist, Eleanor wondered if she was making the right decision, or if her desperation for survival was leading her to accept risks no mother should take. News traveled quickly in Willow Creek. By Monday morning, Eleanor sensed the change when she took the children to town for supplies. Conversations halted as she entered the general store. Women who had previously offered thinly veiled curiosity now watched with open wariness. Men eyed her with a mixture of pity and something else, perhaps concern about the dangerous man she had unwittingly brought into their peaceful community. "Mama, why is everyone looking at us funny?" Sarah whispered, clutching Eleanor's skirts. "People are just being nosy," Eleanor replied, keeping her voice light. "Remember what I taught you about minding your own business? Some folks haven't learned that lesson yet." Mr. Peterson, the shopkeeper, was less friendly than usual as he filled Eleanor's modest order. "How are things out at your place, Mrs. Hayes?" he asked, his emphasis on her new surname unmistakable. "Improving daily, thank you," she answered with deliberate brightness. "Mr. Hayes has made considerable progress with the repairs." "I'm sure he's very capable," Peterson replied, counting out her change with precision. "Sheriff Turner was quite surprised to see him in these parts." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "My husband's past employment is just that, the past. He's a farmer now." Peterson's skeptical expression made it clear he wasn't convinced. "A man doesn't change his nature that easily, Mrs. Hayes, especially one with his reputation." "Perhaps not," Eleanor conceded, gathering her purchases, "but he deserves the chance to try." Back at the farm, Jackson worked silently on repairing the chicken coop, his movements methodical and precise. Eleanor watched him from the kitchen window as she prepared vegetables for canning. There was something soothing about his steady labor, despite what she now knew about his past. That evening, after the children were abed, Eleanor found the courage to seek more answers. Jackson sat at the kitchen table, cleaning the old rifle he'd found in the barn. Samuel's hunting rifle, long unused. His hands moved with practiced efficiency over the weapon, evidence of his familiarity with firearms. "The town is buzzing with talk about your past," she said, sitting across from him. "Expected as much." He didn't look up from his work. "James asked me today if you used to catch bad men. Apparently Tommy Wilson told him at church that you were famous." This caught Jackson's attention. His hands stilled. "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That you used to hunt people who broke the law, but now you're helping us with the farm." Eleanor folded her hands on the table. "He thinks it's exciting. Wants to know if you've killed 20 men or 30. A grim smile crossed Jackson's face. "What do you think the real number is?" The direct question startled her. I don't know. I haven't let myself think about it." Better keep it that way. He resumed cleaning the rifle. No, Eleanor said firmly. No more evasions. You agreed no more secrets that might affect my family. The whole town is talking. My children are asking questions. I need to know who I brought into my home. Jackson set down the cleaning cloth and finally met her gaze. The lamplight cast harsh shadows across his face, emphasizing its severe planes. 15, he said simply. That's how many I've killed. All with bounties on their heads, all who resisted capture. Another 23 I brought in alive. Eleanor absorbed this information, trying to reconcile the numbers with the man before her. And before you were a bounty hunter? What were you then? Army scout, before that ranch hand, before that a boy who grew up fast. He picked up the rifle again. Is that enough history for you, Eleanor? Or shall I count the horses I've broken and the fences I've mended too? The bitterness in his voice caught her by surprise. I'm not judging you, Jackson. I'm trying to understand. Why? So you can decide if your $3 bought a monster? He reassembled the rifle with quick, efficient movements. I told you what matters. I've never harmed a woman or child. The men I killed had their chances. And the Ryder gang? The ones who were supposed to be captured alive? His expression hardened. I found them standing over what was left of that family. The father had been tortured. The mother. He stopped, jaw tightening. The older girl was still breathing, but there wasn't anything to be done for her. I made sure she didn't suffer long. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, the horror of his words sinking in. And the younger child? The one in the root cellar? 6 years old, maybe 7. Couldn't speak when I found her, just staring, silent. His voice softened slightly. Took her to a settlement 2 days' ride away. There was a doctor there, and his wife had lost a child the year before. They took her in. This unexpected glimpse of compassion shifted something in Eleanor's understanding of Jackson Hayes. Not a cold-blooded killer then, but a man who had faced unspeakable darkness and made choices she couldn't fully comprehend. Do you ever wonder what happened to her, the little girl? Jackson's hands stilled again. Sometimes. Is that why you responded to Sarah the way you did, when she was hiding behind me? His eyes met hers, something vulnerable flickering briefly in their blue depths. Maybe. They sat in silence for several moments, the weight of revelation hanging between them. The Harvest Festival is this Saturday, Eleanor said finally, changing the subject. James is excited about it. Jackson nodded, accepting the shift. Town events aren't really my specialty. Perhaps not, but it would look strange if my husband didn't attend. She hesitated. And it would mean a lot to James. The boy's warming up to me then? He thinks you're the most exciting thing to happen to Willow Creek in years, Eleanor admitted with a small smile, though I've told him not to pester you with questions about your bounty hunting days. Appreciate that. Jackson set the cleaned rifle aside. I'll go to this festival if it's important to you, but don't expect me to be welcomed with open arms. I don't, she assured him. But hiding away will only feed the gossip. Better to face it directly. The Harvest Festival dawned bright and clear, the October sun casting golden light over the town square. Stalls lined the perimeter, offering everything from candied apples to handcrafted goods. Children darted between hay bales and carved pumpkins, their laughter carrying on the crisp autumn air. Eleanor felt the stares as they arrived, Jackson driving the wagon with quiet confidence. He had dressed carefully in the cleanest clothes he possessed, his dark hair tamed and face freshly shaved. The effort touched her. He was trying in his own way to honor their arrangement. James immediately spotted his friends and raced off after securing permission. Sarah, unusually, asked to go with him rather than cling to Eleanor's side. The little girl had been watching Jackson with growing curiosity since learning of his past life, as if trying to reconcile the quiet man who fixed their home with the legendary figure who caught bad men. "They'll be fine," Jackson said, noting Eleanor's concern as the children disappeared into the crowd. "This town's too small for trouble, and everyone knows they're with us." "With you, you mean," Eleanor corrected gently. "No one would dare bother the children of Jack Hayes." A trace of humor touched his lips. "There are advantages to a fearsome reputation." They moved through the festival together, maintaining the pretense of marriage with careful proximity but minimal contact. Eleanor noticed how people made way for Jackson, conversations pausing as they passed, mothers drawing children closer. Yet alongside the fear, she caught glimpses of something else, a reluctant respect from the men who nodded in Jackson's direction, and a praising curiosity from some of the women. Sheriff Turner watched them from the doorway of his office, his expression unreadable. Jackson acknowledged him with a slight nod but kept his distance. "He doesn't trust me," Jackson observed quietly. "Smart man." "Should he not trust you?" Eleanor asked. Jackson's gaze swept the festival grounds, ever vigilant. "I'm not here to cause trouble, but old habits die hard." "Which habits are those?" His eyes met hers, serious and direct. "Watching for threats, identifying escape routes, noting who's armed and how." He nodded subtly toward two men near the cider press. "Those men have been watching us since we arrived. One has a concealed pistol, poorly hidden beneath his coat." Eleanor felt a chill despite the warm autumn sun. "Do you know them?" "No, but they know me, or at least my reputation." His hand moved imperceptibly closer to his own concealed weapon. "Stay close to me, Eleanor." The harvest festival hummed with activity around them, but Eleanor could feel the undercurrent of tension in Jackson's posture. His casual stance belied the alertness in his eyes as they tracked the two strangers. "Should we find the children?" Eleanor asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Not yet. Don't want to alarm them." Jackson guided her toward the apple-bobbing contest, positioning himself so he could watch the men while appearing to focus on the festivities. "Just stay within arm's reach." For the next hour, they moved through the festival with deliberate casualness. Jackson maintained a protective proximity without drawing attention, his hand occasionally brushing her elbow to steer her away from the stranger's line of sight. Eleanor found herself hyper-aware of his presence, the warmth radiating from his body, the subtle scent of soap and leather, the measured rhythm of his breathing. James appeared occasionally, breathless with excitement about various contests and treats, before dashing off again with his friends. Sarah stayed with the other small girls, supervised by Martha, who had offered to watch her while casting meaningful glances at Eleanor and Jackson. "Everyone thinks we want time alone together," Eleanor murmured as Martha ushered the girls toward the quilting display, "like proper newlyweds." A hint of wry amusement touched Jackson's expression. "Let them think it. Gives us an excuse to stay close." As afternoon stretched toward evening, the strangers made their move. One approached the cider stand where Eleanor and Jackson stood, while the other circled behind them. "Jack Hayes," the first man said, his voice just loud enough to be heard over the festival noise. "Thought you disappeared for good after the Ryder business." Jackson turned slowly, positioning himself slightly in front of Eleanor. "Don't believe we've met." "No, but I knew Lester Ryder. He was my wife's cousin." The man's hand hovered near his concealed weapon. "Family's been looking for you a long time." Eleanor felt her heart hammering against her ribs. The revenge she had feared was materializing before her eyes. "Your wife's cousin was a murderer and worse," Jackson replied evenly. "He made his choice, I made mine." "That's your new woman?" The second man had completed his circle, eyeing Eleanor with undisguised malice. Pretty little thing. Bet she doesn't know half of what you've done. Jackson's posture shifted subtly, a coiled readiness that reminded Eleanor forcefully of his lethal background. This isn't the place for this conversation, gentlemen. My wife has nothing to do with old business. Wife? The first man laughed, an ugly sound. That's Rich. Jack Hayes playing house with a frontier widow. Does she warm your bed while you sleep with one eye open waiting for men like us to find you? Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks at the crude implication, but kept her gaze steady. I suggest you move along, sir. This is a family event. The man's eyes narrowed at her intervention. Seems your woman's got spirit, Hayes. Lester's wife had spirit too before he broke her. Maybe when we're done with you, we'll see if your widow's just as... He never finished the threat. Jackson moved with stunning speed, his fist connecting with the man's jaw before he could reach for his weapon. The second man lunged forward, but Jackson was already pivoting, driving his elbow into the attacker's sternum with practiced precision. Women screamed, children scattered. The festive atmosphere shattered as bystanders registered the violence erupting in their midst. Get the children, Jackson ordered Eleanor, his voice calm despite the situation. Take them to the wagon. Sheriff Turner pushed through the gathering crowd, hand on his holstered pistol. That's enough, he barked. Hayes, back away. The first man was struggling to his feet, blood trickling from his split lip. He attacked me, Sheriff, unprovoked. Unprovoked? Eleanor stepped forward before Jackson could stop her. You threatened me, sir, in front of witnesses. She gestured to the stunned onlookers. My husband defended me from your vile suggestions. Jackson's surprise at her intervention was momentary, quickly masked by his impassive expression. Sheriff Turner looked between them, clearly weighing the situation. These men approached us, Jackson explained evenly, made threats related to the Ryder gang. I acted to protect my wife. Martha pushed forward, Sarah clutching her hand. It's true, Sheriff. I heard that awful man threatening Eleanor, using language that shouldn't be spoken in decent company, let alone at a family gathering. Sheriff Turner's mouth tightened. He turned to the two strangers. You boys aren't from around here. I suggest you leave Willow Creek immediately. You're taking his side? The second man demanded incredulously. Do you know what he did to the Ryders? I know the Ryders had bounties on their heads for murder, robbery, and worse, the sheriff replied coldly. I also know Mr. Hayes is a resident of this community now, married to one of our respected widows. You, however, are troublemakers disrupting our harvest festival. His hand remained on his holstered weapon. Your choice, gentlemen. Leave peacefully or spend the night in my jail. The men exchanged glances, clearly reassessing their odds. With a final venomous look at Jackson, they backed away. This isn't over, Hayes, the first man spat. Not by a long shot. Never thought it was, Jackson replied quietly. As the strangers retreated, Sheriff Turner turned to Jackson. I want no trouble in my town, Hayes. Wasn't looking for any. Yet it found you anyway. The sheriff's gaze was penetrating. I'll escort these men to the town limits, but you'd best watch your back, and maybe consider whether bringing your past to our doorstep was fair to Mrs. Hayes and her children. The barb struck home. Eleanor could see it in the tightening of Jackson's jaw. As the sheriff departed, the festival slowly resumed around them, though the carefree atmosphere had dissipated. James pushed through the crowd, eyes wide with excitement. Did you really hit that man, Mr. Hayes? Tommy said you knocked him down with one punch. James, Eleanor admonished, violence is nothing to admire. But he was protecting you, wasn't he? Like in the stories. Jackson crouched to the boy's level. Sometimes a man has to stand up against threats, James. But fighting should always be the last choice, not the first. Remember that. The boy nodded solemnly, clearly storing away this wisdom from a man he was increasingly coming to admire. The ride home was tense with unspoken concerns. The children, exhausted from the day's excitement, fell asleep in the back of the wagon. Only when they were safely tucked into bed did Eleanor confront the issue hanging between them. "Those men will be back," she said simply, joining Jackson on the porch where he sat watching the moonlit fields. "Yes." No platitudes, no false reassurances. She appreciated his honesty, even as it frightened her. "What are we going to do?" Jackson studied her face in the dim light. "You could ask me to leave. It's me they want, not you or the children." The suggestion struck Eleanor with unexpected force. After less than 2 weeks, the thought of Jackson leaving felt wrong, as if a cornerstone would be removed from her fragile new foundation. "No," she said firmly, "that's not an option." Surprise flickered across his features. "It would be safer for you." "Would it?" She settled beside him on the porch step. A widow alone with 2 young children, a struggling farm, winter approaching. That wasn't safe enough for me to avoid a bride auction. It's not safe enough now. The Ryder family is dangerous, Eleanor. They don't care about collateral damage. Neither do wolves or starvation, she countered. At least with you here, we have a fighting chance against all 3. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Practical as always. I have to be. Eleanor wrapped her shawl tighter against the evening chill. But it's not just practicality. You've been fair with us, Jackson. You've worked hard. The children are growing attached to you. And you? The question was soft, almost hesitant. Eleanor looked out across the darkened farm, considering her answer carefully. I'm growing accustomed to your presence. High praise indeed, he remarked dryly. It's more than I expected when I spent my $3, she admitted. I thought I was buying labor, not... She trailed off, unsure how to define what Jackson had become to her family. Not a target for vengeful outlaws? Not someone the children would miss if he left, she corrected softly. Not someone I would worry about if he faced danger alone. The admission hung between them, more intimate than any physical contact. Jackson's expression remained unreadable, but something shifted in his posture, attention releasing, or perhaps transforming into a different kind altogether. I'll strengthen the locks tomorrow, he said finally. Show James and you how to use the rifle just in case. In case of what? His eyes met hers, serious and direct. In case I'm not here to protect you. The implication sent a chill through Eleanor. You're not planning to leave? No, he assured her. But a man in my position learns to prepare for all possibilities. Eleanor nodded slowly, understanding the wisdom, even as she resisted the fear it evoked. They sat in companionable silence for several minutes, the night sounds of the farm enveloping them. Crickets chirping, the occasional lowing of cattle, wind rustling through the nearly bare trees. Thank you, she said finally, for defending me today. No one's done that since Samuel. Jackson's hand moved tentatively toward hers on the porch step, hesitated, then covered it with gentle pressure. The contact was brief, a momentary connection, withdrawn almost as soon as it was offered. But its impact lingered like warmth on her skin long after he stood and bid her goodnight. Eleanor remained on the porch after he disappeared into the barn, her mind turning over the day's events. The arrangement was changing, evolving into something neither of them had anticipated, something that complicated their practical agreement with decidedly impractical emotions, and with dangers they had not foreseen. True to his word, Jackson began fortifying the farm the next morning. Eleanor watched from the kitchen window as he installed stronger bolts on the doors and fashioned wooden bars for the windows. By midday, he had moved on to the barn, securing its large doors and the small room where he slept. After lunch, he called James outside. Time you learned about firearms, boy. Eleanor followed, apprehension mingling with resignation. She had hoped her son could maintain his innocence a while longer, but circumstances had forced their hand. Jackson had set up 3 bottles on the fence post beyond the yard. He knelt beside James, Samuel's old rifle looking massive next to the boy's small frame. "First rule," Jackson said, his voice serious but gentle. "A gun is never a toy. It's a tool, like an axe or a saw, but more dangerous than either." James nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir." "Second rule, never point it at anything you don't intend to shoot, even when you think it's unloaded." Eleanor was struck by Jackson's patience as he explained the basic mechanics to James. How to check if the rifle was loaded, how to hold it properly, how to sight along the barrel. He made no move to let the boy actually fire the weapon, focusing instead on respect and safety. "Your turn," Jackson said, turning to Eleanor. She hesitated. "I fired a gun before, Samuel taught me." "Show me." Under his watchful eye, Eleanor demonstrated her knowledge. Her stance was correct, but Jackson made small adjustments to her grip and posture. "You're dropping your elbow," he noted, moving behind her to reposition her arm. His chest briefly pressed against her back as he guided her aim toward the bottles. "Like this. Steadier." The proximity sent a flutter through Eleanor's stomach that had nothing to do with firearms practice. She was acutely aware of his breath near her ear, the solid warmth of him just inches away. "When you're ready," he murmured, stepping back. Eleanor squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, and the middle bottle shattered. "Good," Jackson said simply, but approval shone in his eyes. James whooped with excitement. "Ma, you hit it!" "Your mother's a natural," Jackson told the boy. "Remember that." Later, as dusk gathered, Eleanor found Jackson reinforcing the workshop window. "Do you really think they'll come here?" she asked quietly. He worked silently for a moment before answering. "I've learned to prepare for the worst." "And what is the worst, Jackson?" He set down his hammer, facing her directly. "The Riders weren't just outlaws. They were a family. Brothers, cousins, in-laws. They protected their own and avenged their losses. I killed 4 of them." His eyes were grave. "You do the math." The implication chilled her. "How many might come?" "Hard to say. Some may have lost interest over the years, others might have died or been jailed. But those 2 today," he shook his head. "They've been searching a long time. That kind of hatred doesn't fade." "What will you do if more come?" Jackson picked up his hammer again. "Whatever's necessary to keep you and the children safe." The answer should have comforted her, but instead it raised a different concern. "I don't want you killing men on my property, in front of my children." His movement stilled. "Some situations don't leave clean choices, Eleanor." "There are always choices," she insisted. "We could seek help. The sheriff made his position clear today, but he's one man with limited authority. If a group of armed men comes looking for blood, he won't be able to stop them." "Then we'll leave," she suggested, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. "Go somewhere they can't find us." Jackson's expression softened slightly. "And abandon your farm, your husband's legacy to your children? Winter's coming. Where would you go?" The practical questions deflated her momentary fantasy of escape. "I don't know," she admitted. "I just don't want violence here." "Neither do I." The quiet admission hung between them. "Believe it or not, I came to that auction looking for peace, not another fight." The vulnerability in his statement touched something deep within Eleanor. For the first time, she truly considered what Jackson might have been seeking when he accepted her meager $3. Not just land or a home, but perhaps redemption of sorts. A chance to build rather than destroy. "We'll face whatever comes together," she said finally. "But please try to find a way that doesn't end in bloodshed." He nodded once, a solemn promise. That night, long after the children were asleep, Eleanor found herself unable to rest. The events at the festival replayed in her mind. The threats, Jackson's swift defense, the knowledge that danger might follow them home. She wrapped a shawl around her nightdress and moved quietly to the kitchen, intending to warm some milk. She paused at the window, drawn by movement outside. Jackson was walking the perimeter of the farm, rifle in hand, a self-appointed sentry against threats yet to materialize. The moonlight silvered his profile as he moved with that contained grace that still surprised her, given his size. Without conscious decision, Eleanor opened the door and stepped onto the porch. Jackson turned immediately, alert to the sound. "You should be sleeping," he said, approaching the steps. "So should you." He glanced toward the distant tree line. "Sleep and I have an uneasy relationship." "Nightmares?" she asked softly. A muscle tightened in his jaw. "Sometimes." Eleanor sat on the top step, making room beside her in silent invitation. After a moment's hesitation, Jackson joined her, rifle resting across his knees. "What do you dream about?" she asked. "Nothing worth sharing." "The Ryder family, their victims." His silence was answer enough. "James asked me today if you're going to be his new father," Eleanor said, changing the subject. Jackson's surprise was evident even in the dim light. "What did you tell him?" "That our arrangement is different. That you're here to help us with the farm." "That's honest enough." "Is it?" She turned to study his profile. "I'm not sure what our arrangement is anymore, Jackson." He met her gaze, something unreadable in his expression. "Does it need a name?" "Perhaps not," she conceded. "But it's changing, isn't it?" "Yes." The simple acknowledgement carried weight. They sat in companionable silence for several minutes, the night sounds of the farm enveloping them. Eleanor was acutely aware of his presence beside her, not threatening despite his size and history, but reassuring. When had that shift occurred? "I should check the backfield again," Jackson said finally, rising from the step. "Wait." Eleanor stood as well, gathering her courage. "I've been thinking about your sleeping arrangements." His expression grew guarded. "What about them?" "Winter's coming. The workshop will be freezing, no matter how many blankets you have." "I've endured worse." "That's not the point." She took a steadying breath. "The house has Samuel's study. It's small, but there's room for a proper bed. It would be more appropriate for a husband." Jackson studied her carefully. "Is that what you want? To maintain appearances?" "I want you to have a decent place to sleep," she replied, avoiding the deeper question. "You've earned that much with your work here." "And the townsfolk? What will they think of us sharing closer quarters?" "They already believe what they want to believe," Eleanor said, heat rising in her cheeks. "This changes nothing except your comfort." Jackson was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving her face. "When I agreed to your $3, I didn't expect—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "Kindness." The admission startled her. "Is that so rare in your experience? Genuine kindness, without ulterior motive?" A shadow crossed his features. "Yes." Eleanor's heart ached at the simple truth in his response. What kind of life had this man lived? That basic decency surprised him. "Well, get used to it," she said, attempting lightness. "Kindness is free, even when money isn't." The corner of his mouth lifted in that not-quite smile she was coming to recognize. "I'll move my things tomorrow, if you're certain." "I am." She wrapped her shawl tighter against the night chill. "Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "If those men come back, if there's trouble, wake me first. Don't face it alone." Jackson's expression grew serious again. "Eleanor, promise me, Jackson, we face it together." After a long moment, he nodded. Together. As she returned to her bed, Eleanor wondered at the strange turn her life had taken. $3 had bought her not just labor or protection, but a partnership she hadn't anticipated. Whether that partnership would survive the looming threat remained to be seen, but something told her Jackson Hayes was a man who kept his promises. For tonight, that would have to be enough. Jackson's belongings fit into a single wooden crate: spare clothes, a few tools, a worn leather-bound journal he quickly tucked away when Eleanor glanced at it, and a sheathed hunting knife that had clearly seen extensive use. Such meager possessions for a man of his age and experience. The sight stirred an unexpected melancholy in Eleanor as she helped him settle into Samuel's study. The small room still bore traces of her late husband: his books on the shelves, his handmade desk in the corner, the faint scent of pipe tobacco that lingered despite the month since his passing. Introducing another man's presence felt momentous, a crossing of some invisible boundary she had maintained since becoming a widow. "I can stay in the workshop if this is too difficult," Jackson offered, noting her hesitation as she laid fresh linens on the narrow bed they had moved from the attic. "No." Eleanor smoothed the quilt with deliberate motions. "It's time this room was used again. Samuel wouldn't have wanted it preserved like a shrine." Jackson set his crate beside the bed. "You loved him very much." It wasn't a question, but Eleanor answered anyway. "He was a good man, kind, hard-working, not exciting or particularly handsome, but steady, the kind of man who built things to last." She glanced around the simple room. "Everything solid in this house he made with his own hands, including a good life for you and the children." "Yes." She appreciated that Jackson didn't dismiss Samuel's importance or try to diminish his memory. "What about you? Was there ever someone special?" Jackson busied himself arranging his few possessions. "Once, a long time ago." "What happened?" His hands stilled momentarily. "I chose the wrong path. She chose a safer man." He shrugged, as if dismissing an old pain. "She was right to do so." Eleanor wanted to press further but respected the boundary in his terse response. Instead, she showed him where to find extra blankets and explained the morning routine of the household. "The children rise with the sun. They'll try to be quiet, knowing you're sleeping here now, but children are children," he finished with that ghost of a smile. "Don't worry, I'm a light sleeper anyway." As if to prove his point, Sarah's small voice called from the kitchen. "Mama, I can't reach the cups." "Coming, sweetheart," Eleanor called back. At the doorway, she paused. "Welcome home, Jackson." The words fell between them, weighted with meaning neither was prepared to fully acknowledge. Jackson nodded once, his expression thoughtful as she left to attend to her daughter. The new arrangement quickly settled into its own rhythm. Jackson rose before dawn, kindling the kitchen fire before heading out to tend the livestock. By the time Eleanor and the children emerged for breakfast, coffee would be brewing and the house would be warm. They would share a simple meal before Jackson continued his work on the farm, while Eleanor managed household tasks and the children's lessons. The subtle domesticity of these days surprised Eleanor. Jackson moved through their home with careful respect for their established patterns, yet gradually integrated himself into their lives in small, significant ways. He carved a small wooden horse for Sarah, showed James how to mend a fence, and built a shelf in the kitchen where Eleanor had mentioned needing one. In the evenings, while the children prepared for bed, they would discuss the farm's needs and progress. These conversations, initially focused entirely on practical matters, slowly expanded to include other topics. Books Jackson had read in his travels, places Eleanor had dreamed of visiting, childhood memories safe enough to share. A week after Jackson moved into the house, the first snow fell, earlier than usual, blanketing the farm in pristine white. Eleanor stood at the kitchen window, watching Jackson lead the cattle into the barn for shelter, his broad shoulders dusted with snowflakes, his breath clouding in the frigid air. "He's not going to leave us, is he, Mama?" Sarah asked, appearing at Eleanor's side. The question startled her. "Why do you ask that, sweetheart?" Sarah traced patterns in the condensation on the window. "Tommy Wilson said Mr. Hayes is a dangerous man who will disappear when he gets tired of playing farmer." Her small face turned up to Eleanor's, worried. "But he promised to fix my doll's house when he has time. He wouldn't promise if he was leaving, would he?" Eleanor crouched to her daughter's level. "Mr. Hayes made a commitment to our family. He keeps his promises." She brushed a curl from Sarah's forehead. "And he's not playing at anything. The work he does here is real and important." "I like having him here," the little girl confessed. "He's quiet, but he listens when I talk, and he makes you smile more." The observation, delivered with a child's innocent directness, caught Eleanor off guard. Had she been smiling more? Perhaps she had. There was comfort in shared burdens, in knowing capable hands were helping to secure their future. That evening, as snow continued to fall, they gathered in the main room. Jackson had built up the fire to ward off the deepening chill, and for once he joined them, instead of retreating to his room or making another patrol of the property. James convinced him to play checkers, while Sarah curled against Eleanor's side as she read aloud from a well-worn storybook. The scene was so perfectly domestic, so unlike anything Eleanor had imagined when she clutched those $3 bills at the bride auction, that she found herself pausing in her reading, overcome by a wave of emotion she couldn't quite name. Jackson glanced up, catching her momentary falter. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement, perhaps, of how far they had come from their businesslike beginning, how dangerously close they were to becoming a true family, rather than an arrangement of convenience. Their fragile peace shattered 3 days later. Jackson was repairing a broken hinge on the barn door when he suddenly straightened, his posture alert. Eleanor, hanging laundry nearby despite the cold, followed his gaze to the distant road. A wagon was approaching, moving steadily through the light snow that had fallen overnight. As it drew closer, Eleanor could make out 3 men, strangers, their faces obscured by scarves against the cold. "Get the children," Jackson said quietly. "Take them inside." "Is it them, the riders?" "Can't tell yet, but we're not taking chances." His hand moved to the pistol he now wore constantly at his waist. "Remember what I taught you? Rifles loaded by the back door. Bar the windows once you're inside." Eleanor hurried to the chicken coop where the children were gathering eggs. "Inside, quickly," she instructed, keeping her voice calm despite her racing heart. "It's getting too cold out here." "But we haven't finished," James protested. "Now, James." Her tone brooked no argument. From the safety of the kitchen window, Eleanor watched Jackson walk calmly to the center of the yard, positioning himself between the approaching wagon and the house. His stance was relaxed but ready, hands loose at his sides, the picture of casual greeting, unless one noticed the subtle shift of his weight to the balls of his feet. The wagon halted at the edge of the property. One man remained holding the reins while the other 2 jumped down. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see they were armed. "Keep the children in the bedroom," she told Sarah, who was old enough to understand the seriousness of the situation. "Don't come out until I call for you." With trembling hands, Eleanor retrieved the rifle from its place by the door. She checked it was loaded, just as Jackson had taught her, then moved to the front window where she could see and, if necessary, provide covering fire. The men were speaking to Jackson now, their voices too low to hear through the glass. His posture remained unchanged, but Eleanor could sense the tension radiating from him. One of the men gestured toward the house, then back at Jackson, an ultimatum of some kind. Jackson shook his head once, definitively. The man's hand moved toward his weapon. Everything happened at once. Jackson drew with lightning speed, but didn't fire. Instead, he called out something that made the men hesitate. One raised his hand slightly, while the other kept his hovering near his holster. More words were exchanged. The tension seemed to ease marginally. Then, to Eleanor's surprise, Jackson gestured toward the house, appearing to invite them forward. Her heart pounding, Eleanor moved to the door, rifle still in hand but lowered. Jackson approached, his expression grave. "Sheriff Turner is with them," he said quietly. "They've come with news, not threats. But keep the children back just in case." Relief washed through her, followed immediately by new apprehension. What news would bring the sheriff all the way out to their farm in this weather? As the men drew closer, Eleanor recognized Sheriff Turner despite his scarf and heavy coat. The others were deputies she had seen in town. "Mrs. Hayes," the sheriff greeted her solemnly. "May we come in? There's a matter of some urgency we need to discuss with you and your husband." Sheriff Turner removed his hat as he entered the kitchen, nodding respectfully to Eleanor. His deputies remained near the door, watchful and tense despite the warm interior. Jackson stood slightly apart, his posture deceptively relaxed, though Eleanor could see the vigilance in his eyes. "I apologize for the intrusion, Mrs. Hayes," the sheriff began. Accepting the cup of coffee Eleanor offered more from habit than hospitality. "But matters have developed that concern your household directly." "The Ryder family," Jackson stated flatly. Sheriff Turner nodded. "Word came by telegraph yesterday. A group of them crossed into the territory last week, at least 5 men, possibly more. They've been asking questions in settlements east of here, making no secret of who they're looking for." Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she set down the coffee pot. "They're coming here to our farm?" "I believe so, ma'am." The sheriff's weathered face was grave. "One of my deputies was in Fort Collins when they passed through. They were explicit about hunting down Jack Hayes and, I quote, 'the woman fool enough to marry him.'" Jackson's expression hardened at the implied threat to Eleanor. "How long?" 2 days, maybe 3, depending on the weather." Sheriff Turner glanced toward the window where snow continued to fall. "This might slow them down, but it won't stop them." "Why come all this way?" Eleanor asked. "After so many years?" One of the deputies spoke up. "The Ryders never forget a blood debt, ma'am, and Hayes killed 4 of their kin." "They were murdering, raping outlaws with prices on their heads," Jackson countered, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I'm not disputing that," the deputy replied, "just explaining their motivation." Sheriff Turner set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "I came to warn you, but also to discuss options. This isn't just about you anymore, Hayes. Those men at the festival made it clear they have no qualms about threatening Mrs. Hayes or causing trouble in my town." "What are you suggesting?" Jackson asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "For the safety of Mrs. Hayes, her children, and the town." The sheriff hesitated. "It might be best if you moved on. Draw them away from here." The suggestion landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of tension through the room. Eleanor found herself stepping closer to Jackson almost without conscious thought. "No," she said firmly, surprising everyone, including herself. "That's not an option." "Mrs. Hayes," Sheriff Turner said gently, "I understand you've entered into an arrangement with Mr. Hayes, but this situation is precisely why I need him here," she interrupted. "You suggest removing our strongest defense right as danger approaches. How does that protect my children?" "The danger is coming because of him," the sheriff pointed out. "And it will find only me if he leaves," Eleanor countered. "Do you think these men will simply accept his absence and depart peacefully? Or will they take their frustration out on his woman fool enough to marry him?" Jackson's hand touched her elbow briefly. Support or warning, she wasn't sure. Eleanor, the sheriff has a point. If I leave tonight, create a trail heading west, they'll follow me. And leave us defenseless against winter predators and any riders suspicious enough to check here anyway. She turned to face him directly. We agreed to face this together, remember? Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, respect, perhaps even tenderness. I remember. Sheriff Turner cleared his throat. I can spare one deputy to stay at the farm, and I'll gather some townsfolk to form a defensive group. But my resources are limited, Hayes. If a gang of armed riders arrives in force. I understand, Jackson said, and I appreciate the warning, Sheriff. But Mrs. Hayes is right. Running won't solve this. It will only postpone it, possibly at her expense. The sheriff studied them both, seeming to recognize the futility of further argument. Very well. I'll send Deputy Clark out tomorrow with supplies. In the meantime, I suggest you prepare for unwelcome visitors. After the sheriff and his men departed, Eleanor checked on the children, finding them playing quietly in the bedroom as instructed. Only when she was certain they were settled did she return to the kitchen where Jackson stood staring out the window at the falling snow. You should have let me go, he said without turning. That wasn't our agreement. Our agreement, he repeated, a bitter edge to his voice. $3 for a husband. Nothing in that bargain required you to risk your life and your children's safety. Eleanor moved to stand beside him. Is that what you think this is still about? A transaction? He turned to face her, his expression uncharacteristically raw. What else could it be, Eleanor? You needed help with your farm. I needed a place to disappear, to start over. And have you started over? She asked softly. His gaze dropped to his hands, capable hands that had built and repaired so much on her farm, hands that had also taken lives. I thought I could, these past weeks. He paused. Being here with you and the children, it felt like something I'd never expected to have. And now I've brought death to your doorstep. His voice was rough with emotion. Every instinct I have is telling me to leave tonight, draw them away from you, face them on my terms. And every promise you've made tells you to stay, she reminded him, to stand with us, to protect what we've built together. What have we built, Eleanor? The question hung between them, demanding truth neither had fully acknowledged. She took a deep breath. A partnership, a home, perhaps the beginning of something more. The admission cost her. Pride, certainty, the safe distance she had maintained even as she invited him further into her life. But with danger approaching, pretense seemed suddenly pointless. Jackson's expression softened. You deserve better than a man with blood on his hands. Your children deserve better. We deserve to survive, she countered, and to choose our own path forward. She hesitated, then asked the question that had lingered since the auction. Why did you accept my $3, Jackson? You could have found employment anywhere with your skills. Why agree to marry a desperate widow? For a long moment he was silent, his eyes searching hers as if weighing how much truth to share. Finally, he spoke. The little girl from the Ryder raid, the one I found hiding in the root cellar. She had eyes like Sarah's. His voice was quiet, controlled. For months after I left her with that doctor and his wife, I kept seeing her face, kept wondering if I'd done enough, if she'd ever feel safe again. Understanding dawned. You wanted to protect someone instead of hunt them. He nodded once. When I saw you at that auction, this proud woman offering her last dollars for protection, something shifted. I thought maybe this was a chance to balance the scales, to build instead of destroy. Eleanor felt tears threatening, not from fear or sadness, but from the recognition of what they truly offered each other, Not just practical assistance or physical safety, but redemption, a chance to heal old wounds through new beginnings. "Then stay," she said simply. "Fight beside me, not just for the farm or the children's security, but for whatever this is becoming between us." Jackson reached out slowly, his calloused fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face with unexpected gentleness. The touch lingered, evolving into a caress against her cheek that sent warmth spreading through her despite the winter chill. "I don't deserve this," he murmured. "Any of it." "That's not for you to decide," she replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. $3 bought me the right to make that judgment." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Is that what your $3 purchased? The right to see good in me when I can't see it myself? Perhaps it was the best investment I ever made." The distance between them had narrowed, the kitchen suddenly intimate despite the vastness of the prairie beyond their windows. For a breath, Eleanor thought he might kiss her, saw the consideration in his eyes, felt the subtle shift of his posture toward her. A sharp crack split the air, the distinctive sound of a rifle shot from somewhere beyond the barn. Jackson moved instantly, pushing Eleanor away from the window. "Get the children," he ordered, drawing his pistol. "Back room, away from windows." "They're here already?" Panic edged her voice. "The sheriff said 2 days." "Not the riders," Jackson interrupted, peering cautiously around the window frame. "Just 2 riders moving fast. Scouts, maybe, or unrelated trouble." His expression was grim. "Either way, our time just ran out." Eleanor gathered the children quickly, her hands steady despite her racing heart. Jackson moved through the house with practiced efficiency, checking windows and securing doors. "What's happening, Mama?" James asked, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement as she ushered them into the small storage room adjoining the kitchen, the only space without windows. "Just some trouble with trespassers," she replied, forcing calm into her voice. "We need to stay quiet and out of sight for a little while." Sarah clutched her rag doll to her chest. "Is Mr. Hayes going to make the bad men go away?" Eleanor met Jackson's gaze across the room. "Yes, sweetheart. That's exactly what he's going to do." Jackson brought the rifle and extra ammunition to Eleanor, then crouched to speak directly to the children. "Your mother knows how to use this," he told them seriously. "She'll keep you safe if anyone tries to come inside, but no one will, because I'll be making sure of that." James straightened his small shoulders. "I can help. You showed me how to hold the gun." "The best help you can give is staying here with your mother and sister," Jackson replied, his tone gentle but firm. "That's the most important job right now." The boy nodded solemnly, accepting the responsibility. Jackson's hand briefly rested on his head, a gesture so paternal it made Eleanor's throat tighten. "Eleanor," Jackson turned to her, his voice low, "if something happens to me—" "Don't," she interrupted. "Listen," he insisted. "If something happens, there's money in my journal. Enough to get you through winter and beyond. Get to your friend Martha's place. The sheriff will help you." Before she could respond, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, a brief, fierce kiss that held both promise and farewell. Then he was gone, slipping out the back door into the swirling snow. Eleanor touched her fingers to her lips, the warmth of the unexpected contact lingering. No time for that now. She positioned herself where she could watch the door while keeping the children behind her, rifle ready across her lap. Minutes stretched into an hour of tense silence. Occasionally she heard movements outside, footsteps in snow, the distant whinny of horses. No more shots, no shouting. The uncertainty was its own kind of torture. "Someone's coming," James whispered suddenly, pointing toward the kitchen where footsteps could be heard on the porch. Eleanor raised the rifle, aiming at the door. "Stay behind me." The door opened slowly. Jackson stood there, snow dusting his shoulders, his expression grim but calm. Eleanor lowered the weapon with shaking hands. "Scouts," he confirmed, stepping inside and securing the door behind him. "2 men checking the property. They're not coming back." The flat certainty in his voice told Eleanor everything she needed to know. "Did you?" "They fired first," he said simply. "I defended our home." Our home. The possessive pronoun resonated between them. "The children are safe," she told him, matching his practical tone. "What happens now?" "Now we prepare." Jackson moved to the window, scanning the horizon. They sent scouts ahead. The main group won't be far behind, a day at most, depending on how quickly these 2 were expected to report back. "Should we leave? Try to reach town?" He shook his head. "Too risky in this weather with children, and they'd likely intercept us on the road." His expression softened slightly as he looked at her. "This is our best defensive position. We know this land. They don't. Our land." Another claim of belonging that sent warmth through Eleanor despite the circumstances. The next day passed in tense preparation. Jackson reinforced doors and windows, positioned furniture as additional barriers, and prepared multiple weapons for quick access. Eleanor packed emergency supplies and rehearsed escape routes with the children should the worst happen. By nightfall, the farm stood ready, a fortress against the coming storm, both literal and figurative. The snow had increased throughout the day, visibility reduced to mere yards beyond the house. "The weather's in our favor," Jackson observed as they sat at the kitchen table, a map of the property spread before them. "They'll have trouble approaching unseen in this snow." "Will the sheriff come?" Eleanor asked. "He promised to send Deputy Clark." "In this blizzard? Unlikely." Jackson's finger traced potential approach routes on the map. "We're on our own until the weather clears." Eleanor reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "We've been on our own since the beginning. Nothing's changed." He turned his hand to clasp hers. "Everything's changed," he corrected softly. They slept in shifts that night, one watching while the other rested. The children huddled together in the storage room on a makeshift pallet, surprisingly calm under the circumstances. Children of the frontier learned early to face hardship with resilience. Dawn broke gray and foreboding, the snow finally tapering, but leaving behind deep drifts that transformed the familiar landscape. Jackson stood at the kitchen window, scanning the white expanse with narrowed eyes. "There," he said suddenly, pointing toward a distant tree line. "Movement." Eleanor joined him, following his gaze. Shadowy figures moved against the white backdrop, at least 6 men on horseback, approaching slowly through the deep snow. "More than the sheriff estimated," she observed, her voice steady despite her racing heart. 7, Jackson confirmed grimly. "Too many for me to handle alone." He turned to her, his expression resolute. "Get the rifle. When they get within range, we'll need to make every shot count." As Eleanor retrieved the weapon, a flicker of movement from the opposite direction caught her attention. "Jackson," she called softly. "Look." Through the eastern window, more figures appeared, but these wore the distinctive hats and badges of lawmen. Sheriff Turner had kept his word after all, bringing not just Deputy Clark, but a posse of armed townsfolk. Among them, Eleanor recognized the blacksmith, the general store owner, and even Reverend Collins. "Seems Willow Creek decided you're worth defending," Eleanor said, a smile breaking through her tension. Jackson's surprise was evident. "They're not here for me." "Perhaps not," she conceded, "but they're here for us, for our family." The confrontation unfolded across the snow-covered fields of the farm. Sheriff Turner's group intercepted the rider contingent before they reached the house, forcing them to halt and parley. From the window, Eleanor and Jackson watched the tense standoff, unable to hear the words exchanged, but understanding the message. This town protected its own. After several minutes of heated discussion, the rider group turned their horses and slowly departed, escorted by half the sheriff's posse to ensure they left the county. Sheriff Turner approached the house alone, stamping snow from his boots on the porch. "Seems the weather worked in our favor," he announced as Jackson opened the door. They weren't expecting a reception committee, nor to find the whole town standing with Jack Hayes. "Why did they leave so easily?" Eleanor asked, suspicious of such a simple resolution. "Wouldn't call it easy," the sheriff replied, "but I made the situation clear. They're outnumbered, in unfamiliar territory, facing not just Hayes, but a united community. Even vendetta has its practical limits." "They'll be back," Jackson stated, certainty in his voice. "Perhaps," the sheriff conceded, "but not today, and not tomorrow. That's victory enough for now." He studied Jackson thoughtfully. "You've made a place for yourself here, Hayes. That counts for something." After the sheriff departed, promising to send word if the riders were spotted anywhere in the territory, a strange quiet settled over the farm. The children emerged from their shelter, eager to play in the fresh snow now that the danger had passed. Eleanor watched them through the window, James showing Sarah how to make snow angels in the pristine white drifts. "It's not over," Jackson said, joining her. "They'll come again. Maybe not for months or even years, but someday." "I know." Eleanor turned to face him. "And we'll be ready when they do." "We?" he questioned, searching her face. "You still want me here, knowing the danger I bring?" Eleanor took his hand, her grip firm and certain. $3 bought me a husband of convenience, Jackson. But what we've built since then." She glanced toward the children playing outside, then back to his weathered face. "That's beyond price." "I'm not the man you deserve," he began. "You're exactly the man I chose," she interrupted. "Not at the auction. That was desperation. But every day since, when I've chosen to trust you, to welcome you into our home, to..." She hesitated, then finished softly, "to love you." The word hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Jackson's hand rose to cup her cheek, his touch gentle despite its strength. "I never thought I'd hear those words again. Never thought I'd deserve to." "Love isn't about deserving," Eleanor said. "It's about choosing. And I choose you, Jackson Hayes, danger and all." This time when he kissed her, there was no threat looming, no farewell implied, only promise and beginning. A kiss to seal not a transaction of necessity, but a union of choice and growing love. Outside, the children's laughter rang across the snow-covered farm, their home, their future, together. $3 had bought Eleanor a husband, but what they had found together was priceless.